Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Futbol podcast, episode 209 of Northern Futbol. Ben Steiner alongside Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gongi-Ruzic. And just off air now, we were chatting about New Year's party guests. And I mentioned that we brought two physios to Alex's New Year's party. Now, they were just friends who are studying physical therapy. But Brendan, I know your soccer game last night didn't exactly go to plan.
Yeah, the conversation started because I'd said that there's a physio on my team and I needed like an in-game treatment, to which then your ears perked up and you said, I brought two physios to Alex's New Year's party. I'm like, you brought two dates to the party? No, I just brought two physios. Oh, that's weird. Why do you got to label their profession right away? He's like, I'm bringing the president to the party. Yeah, and if the president from Dunbar Soccer Association shows up with you, you've left out some context here that's applicable, Ben, that's all.
Spot the American, the guy who labels everyone by their profession. It's like the classic, so some places you go, they're like, where are you from? Some places they ask you certain things. And then whenever you're in America, it's where'd you go to school and what do you do? That's
the big trope between like Western Canada and Toronto, right? When I went to Alberta for the first time and visited some friends that had moved from Toronto, who I was surprised loved it as much as they did. One of the first things they said was, when people ask you here, what do you do? And I start to talk about my job, they cut you off immediately and go, no. What do you do for fun? What are your activities? Are you a hiker? Are you a skier? Do you do water sports? Like they don't care off the bat about the job, which I find is not the case in Toronto. And yeah, obviously an American stereotype.
Yeah, the weird one in the U.S. is the school pride, because we just don't have that here. It's not the first thing that you mentioned that you went to Harvard or Dartmouth, maybe Harvard or Dartmouth if you went there. I don't know why those are the ones that come to mind, but
yeah,
Shaughnessy Ben strikes again.
Exactly. When you graduated from private school in the richest neighborhood in Vancouver, that's exactly why. Do you even see other divisions, or you're just like, Ivy League only? I guess I'm playing football at Rutgers. They're the most competitive.
I can do my polo.
No, I was going to go down to an Oregon game, actually. I was going to go down
to watch, or
just
to
watch,
enlist?
Yeah. Just to watch. Okay. Yeah.
Well, you should go and bring Alex with you. Just make sure that there's not some like Tacoma reserve team game that would overlap, because he'd miss out on that.
Shout out to Knicks, bro.
Shout out to Zaze Di Rosario. Is he still there at Tacoma?
Yeah, he probably surely he's going to sign first team soon.
Okay.
Guyana International now that he is balling out in CONCACAF.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle's doing some other pretty significant business as well. They just signed Jesus Ferreira today. So pretty significant offseason for Seattle, and not so significant yet for the Vancouver Whitecaps or TFC, but we'll get into that after some CanMNT notes this week. It doesn't look like the CanMNT is going to have a January camp, a Camp Poutine, however you want to call it. U.S. national team is doing it. They've called up a couple players that are playing with Canadian clubs. Brian White from the Vancouver Whitecaps, George Campbell, Ken Clark, and new signing Jalen Neal from CF Montreal. But is this a disaster that Canada isn't having a January camp, or is it just kind of what we expected after Jesse Marsh poured some cold water on it at the last international window?
Yeah, we spoke a little bit about it before. I don't think it's a disaster at all. And I think he's using the opportunity in the ways that he can. He's doing some coaching clinics. They're going to be, out there public. It's great that, Marsh is going to be front facing and working during this window. It's not like he's just sitting back or scouting or staying in Europe. I think you'll feel his presence and the program's presence just in a different way, but then they're really not losing out on this. If they get the opportunity to reconvene in February, it's all about preparing for March, right? It's all about that Nations League, which, as I say, is the tournament that they need to win this year. So I don't think that not having a camp really hurts them at all.
Yeah, I think it's something where it's worth noting that there's advantages and I think there's benefit, but you're not losing anything. I think that sometimes you get caught in a this or that. And I think the this or that is this: you get a camp and you get to see more players in games, and that is that it's a disaster. I think it's more something where the this still applies, but the that isn't as disastrous. I think, for example, you're not getting a lot of regulars, right? So I see some talk of, does this impact Nations League preparation? Ultimately, now Canada's at a point where their starting 11 mostly consists of guys playing in the top 5 leagues. Those guys are all playing. Those guys are all getting minutes. You're not worrying about them picking up rust, etc. Yes, it hurts the MLS guys, but also MLS is changing. It's worth noting some of them played as deep into November, almost December with the playoffs. So it's not like they were coming off a long layoff, which was why camp poutines were very important 5, 6, 7 years ago. And sometimes the season would end in October and you're coming January, and a lot of your key guys, you just need to get the minutes. And for a lot of these guys, preseason's already starting. A lot of them play Champions League. For some reason, MLS kicks off like February 25th or something ridiculously early. So they're already trying to win their spots. Like for Brian White, the Whitecaps are getting impacted by the fact that he's leaving their training camp in Spain to go and get this opportunity in the US. So I think it's something where I think there's benefit for us, to learn more about the pool. There's benefit to Jesse Marsh. For a lot of these players, there's just as much benefit as staying with their clubs and trying to win a spot ahead of a very busy season.
Here's my Brian White prediction for this year. He will leave the Whitecaps again during the Gold Cup, right, whether the MLS decides they're breaking or not. And he will be not a breakout star, but he will be a star for the U.S. at the Gold Cup, much the same way Jossie Zardes was in 2012 or whatever. They would run these B teams through, and they would be led by these MLS guys who made themselves national stars. I think Brian White can do that this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could definitely see that with the way that Brian White succeeded with the Whitecaps. But I also kind of consider where Brian White finds himself in his career. Is it more important for him to go to a preseason, get used to what's going to be a new coach, assuming the Whitecaps have a new coach by that, get himself working in that system? Or is it going to be, as he's doing, go to this USMNT camp, which is filled with a lot of guys that aren't going to be getting regular minutes with the top choice USMNT. So is that like a concern, you think, for Brian White to pick one over the other, really, in terms of affecting his club career?
I think Brian White's in the point where he's established, but I think you wonder for the young guys, right? Anyone who's fighting for a spot. Montreal's got a few interesting ones, right? Like a Jalen Neal, George Campbell, the CB Corps it's pretty busy in Montreal. You're missing out on opportunities to gain an early impression. And in Neal's case, a new coach, or for Campbell, just trying to keep your spot. And yeah, you look at from the Whitecaps perspective, a new coach, a new system. You don't want to miss any time. It is a perspective worth exploring. I actually saw an interesting piece, and shout out to Sounder at Heart, who do a lot of good work. They were writing like, is the Camp Cupcakes, they call it in the US, they were having that same question. Is it worth it? Is it something that we've maybe moved past the need for? Little things like that make you kind of lean that way. And it's something where I'm curious to see the future of these sorts of camps going forward. Because as much as you'd want to get these guys looks, again, the ever competitive landscape, all this stuff, coaches changing it just throws so many wrenches into the mix.
And the question from Nick Spirit as well is, do you think this does impact the Gold Cup at all, or even the Nations League? I wouldn't think so. Brendan, you mentioned that it probably doesn't. But do you think there's some players that could have used this opportunity to that could be playing in more competitive games?
For Canada, yeah. I mean, in general, there's still some guys that are looking to prove their worth. Jesse Marsh, there are some players that he hasn't had the time to work with and get to know a little better. There are some players that have surprised him and surprised us. I mean, Ali Ahmed and Mathieu Chouanier were both guys we thought would be on the cusp, both guys that we thought could work their way into the team. Now they're looking potentially like both guys that would be starters in 26. So more games with that coach and more games in that system would benefit those guys. But to Alex's point earlier, no one's really being hurt by them not having a camp, but you can always say, oh, this would have helped. And I just think that they'll find ways to make it up in other ways. And I think in comparison to teams previous, and I'm not so much thinking about Herdman, but kind of before Herdman, I think they're much more effective and efficient in the time that they do spend together since Herdman and now with Jesse Marsh than ever before. So I don't think that you lose as much or have as much of a negative impact by not being as frequent with each other as Canadian teams from the past that couldn't find a way to build on momentum, albeit as small as it may have been, to progress and carry things to another level.
I wonder if the Gold Cup affects Camp Poutine as well, whereas maybe had there been no Gold Cup year and just the Nations League, there might have been more urgency to get a look at more guys. But if you're Jesse Marsh, you can kind of look at the Gold Cup of, all right, Nations League, we're going to go out, we're going to go try to win. And then for the Gold Cup, you're going to be missing guys with the Club World Cup. You're going to be missing guys for transfers. You're going to miss guys with injuries. All those things are going to happen. And then you can earmark, all right, I can properly get a look at some of these MLS guys I want to see more of, from the Nathan Salibas, but also other names, even some in Europe, right? There's been a lot of talks of, wanting to see more of a Seager, right? There's some interesting dual nationals coming up, a Promise David, a Gio Michel. Maybe these are the opportunities to get better looks at them. A Justin Smith, you look across MLS, if a Jivan Badwal gets 500 minutes by the summer, maybe you want to start having a look with him at the senior level. That tournament environment can sometimes also be better than a January camp where, you're the opponents, the situation, a lot of it's on the fly. Whereas in a Gold Cup, it's a tournament. It's really a platform for these guys. I do wonder if that plays into the thinking of Jesse Marsch, where you kind of look at that opportunity down the road and call young guys and be like, look, prove it to me. I want to see you guys really hit your stride so we can call you up and have a proper look at you then.
Yeah, I also wonder if the intensity and the length of some of the training sessions that Jesse Marsch has had with this national team are, more efficient than what Herdman was doing, where it seemed a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical. And we've heard about the intensity and players gasping for air after some of these Jesse Marsch sessions. Clearly, they're being run through absolutely everything. Necessarily, potentially paying off in terms of the need for less camps or a focus on these tournament camps where you're playing games of consequence. You're playing, match preparations where you're going through the motions of preparing for a match and putting out the tactics and everything you need to do to plan for an opponent. Yes, the opponents might not be to the same level that you're going to play at the World Cup or potentially another Copa America, where you're not necessarily getting that in something like a January camp where it can be any mix of things, whether it's scrimmages against club teams or lowly nations that haven't called up their top team either. I remember a Canada-Iceland game years ago at a Camp Poutine. I think it was Herdman's first game in charge. It might have been. I might be completely wrong
2
on
years
that.
off. New Zealand was his first game in charge, funnily enough.
I do remember this Iceland camp being what I would say early in his transition, or it felt it. But yeah.
But that wasn't a game that, I don't think we learned anything from.
It mattered,
and if you're
though,
playing those games,
because it was the FIFA points. It was when they needed the FIFA points for that weird, stupid format they floated, where it was the 6 teams would get a bye and the other 30 teams in CONCACAF would all go fight for a half spot. And Canada was trying desperately to avoid being in that gauntlet and just scheduled friendlies against Barbados and Iceland to try and get points.
Yeah, because they had to be top 6 in CONCACAF in order to reach the hex, right?
And they scheduled the friendly at Starlight Stadium to also try and get some points, and then it got canceled, of course, because of COVID.
In not having a Camp Poutine, where there would have been some of the players that Alex listed, maybe some CPL guys, quite a few more CPL guys than Jesse Marsch has seen so far. I wonder if there's a chance that there are a couple CPL players in the Gold Cup squad, because just based on last season, right? Tristan Borges, MVP. I mean, over the last couple of years, Kyle Becker deserved a shout again, deserved a look again, and just to be involved in the camp. I'm not saying start these games, but just to be involved in that environment again. I think that's also important to Jesse Marsch. So I'd be curious to see if there are maybe even two or three guys in there. And if you reward someone like Marco Carducci with being the third goalkeeper, as opposed to getting a look at some younger English-based academy keeper, as we've seen recently, I'd be curious to see what Jesse Marsch does with CPL guys.
Well, Brendan, to that point, what we'll have to keep an eye on is if there's more of these 16, 17-year-olds popping up like Shola Jimo and Grady McDonald, who are making impacts for their teams, are eligible for other nations and have rumors of getting transfers to Europe. It also might be something where you might want to just get these guys in, get them cap tied, get them in this camp, because they're going to be valuable commodities down the road. So I think that's the intriguing layer of guys to watch, where, in the 2019, 2020, a lot of the key CPL pieces were 23, 24, 25. Now we're seeing a wave of guys in their teens who all of a sudden are really going to be in these dual national conversations for the next few years.
And it goes such a long way, building that youth connection with these players, because the better they are and the older they get, if they are ignored by the national program, they feel slated. And then when they really hit it, and if Canada calls them, then they feel like, oh, now I'm hot, y'all, all y'all want me, as the line is. So it is valuable, and I think Marsch definitely recognizes that, that you reward players that deserve a look.
Yeah, and we've already gotten a bit of a look at that as well with the likes of Shilajimo, called into a camp to at least get a run around. He's not going to, play a game at this point. But potentially at the Gold Cup, he gets called in and potentially cap-tied as well, as you mentioned.
Or even 27. He's not looking at, the other nations he's eligible for.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And jumping into some Canadian women's national team stuff as well. There's not much that's going on with the CanWNT. No January camp for them either. But from W Soccer CA, when do you expect a new coach to be named? It seems like things have gone a little bit quiet.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of floated around timelines last time we spoke, and we kind of said this is a unique situation where this Canadian women's national team doesn't need to rush, right? Like, so it's hard to place a timeline based on where we are now. They do have a camp next February, or not next month. You'd expect to fill that February window, but based on what we've seen in the fall, they've been pretty content to just let some interim coaches, right, like a Katie Collar, Diana Matheson, had to step up. So I wouldn't be surprised for them to do the same. Based on my gut, I just feel like it's going to be something where it's like their best options are going to come up May, June, and they might have to wait that long. Like, whereas if now maybe some of the names they'll be looking at either A, aren't interested, or B, aren't what they hoped, right? I mean, I've been a big fan of throwing out Casey Stoney there. Maybe that's something where they continue to push, but who knows? Maybe Casey Stoney isn't interested, because as far as I understand, she still hasn't signed anywhere. I could be proven wrong, and I can check on that. But maybe it's something where some of the managers you will open up in May, June, and Canada is in a position where they can wait a little and see what that market is, instead of just rushing and getting a hire that potentially impacts your 2027 cycle in the wrong way.
And somewhat related to the CanWNT position as well is, do you think that the NSL is going to potentially have players in that first year on the national team? Like, we know that the likes of Emma Reagan has already been capped by the national team and is somewhat a regular call-up now. But say a striker goes on, a string of hot form, 5 goals in 5 games, similar to the way the CPL wouldn't necessarily put a guy on the radar at this point. But is the NSL at a point where you can go through a strong stretch of form and get a call-up to the national team?
Think about that first season of the CPL, right? Carducci, Borges, was Mauro Stacchio maybe even one player that was
Noah Verhoeven was one.
Noah Verhoeven, yeah. There was a few of those few guys, right? So I can see that being the same way. I think that's important for the program. They certainly recognize that. Emma Reagan's someone has experience. I think that there will be, a hope that she can work her way into the squad on a regular basis. But then you got to reward the players that are shining. And I think that, you can make room in a year like this where they don't have tournaments to win. You can make room to reward players with experience for performance. And I think that would be good. There should be a handful.
I think what's worth noting here at the NSL, we have a better baseline for knowing where these players fit. Like in 2019 with the CPL, reality is a lot of the guys who went to the CPL, they weren't already in the national team picture, bar, some guys like a Nick Ledgerwood who had been in the picture before, but as John Herdman had come in, they weren't really in the picture by then either. So in reality, we're talking about guys 30 to 40, 50 in the roster, if that. That's why you're talking maybe a Gold Cup or on the fringes of a squad. For me, Emma Reagan's probably in my best 23 to 25 right now already. Like a Jessica DeFilippo, she's been someone who I've seen as someone in that top 30 when she was in Spain. There's a few other names who have signed where I've already kind of, put them within the fringes of this national team. So yeah, if they're performing like Emma Reagan, will easily slide in. I think that will give a good baseline based on how the league and how we see the level of it, that if one of her teammates at AFC Toronto really pops off, or someone at the Tides puts in a certain performance level, we have that baseline of knowing, for me, someone who is a national team level player. And I think that's something that's going to change versus when the CPL, we just had no idea what to expect, how to compare, and where to slot that in. So I think that's something to really watch in year one, where I think we can, especially with, like we've mentioned, with the women's national team not having games. A new coach will be maybe more willing to look at a younger player doing their thing in the NSL and look, all right, let's give them a look and then really see what this league's all about.
And this week we also had all the coaches be named, and every club has made a signing as well. Julia Benatti signed with Ottawa Rapid. So Ottawa Rapid slowly but surely building their team. But when you look at the coaches, it's a good mix of different coaches. We've got former U Sports coaches, a couple League One coaches, some foreign coaches. Brendan, when you look at, Lydia Bedford goes to the Calgary Wild as well. What kind of things do you see in this, 6 coaches?
Yeah, I like that there's a mix of experience. I like that there's a mix of age and diversity. The fact that there's 3 male coaches. I did wonder how many male head coaches there would be, if any, perhaps. And I think overall, they seem to have found, 6 very good individuals that are at points in their career where they can bring a lot to, a brand new league that is starting from an advantage point that a lot of other new leagues didn't. I think in some ways, the NSL is beginning, in some ways, steps ahead of where the NWSL did, albeit they were coming from, a failed league. But there was a lot of broken trust. And yes, there was, players, in 2013 that made $100,000 and they were on the marquee list, and they knew that they were going to be okay whether the league sunk or swam. And I think that there's you've got a lot of people from different parts of the world that really invested in wanting to make the NSL work and make this happen. So it seems like they've got a great mix of coaches for the first 6 to start that inaugural season.
And shout out to Denmark for having 2 coaches who saw Canada's league and wanted to throw their stake. So maybe there's the start of some partnerships, there in terms of maybe there's some players in the Danish leagues who could come and really help elevate the league as internationals. Maybe this can open the door for some young Canadians to go, to Denmark, like Emma Reagan has. And I know a few other Canadians have made that jump and done well to use it as a transition into the professional environment. But yeah, the coaching crop, solid. I think the ideal long term is hopefully we see more Canadian trained and developed coaches. Like I would have loved to see Katie Collar part of this crop, and I'm really curious to know what her next move is. Like, does she stick around with the Rise? Is she maybe involved in the national team as an assistant long term? But that's like something we've said with the CPL. It's something where we talk so much about the need for players and why you build a league, but you can't discount the importance of developing coaches, and something that Canada will sorely need in the long term.
No, that's a really good point. Denmark, the new Portugal. Again, that was like the original. Scandinavia is the original Portugal. So it makes sense that, you can rely on some of those old relationships. And for me, seeing how far the program has come on both the men's and the women's side over the last 3 decades, because I got 14 years on you guys, it's amazing to see a lot of these, individual relationships and then the networking and experience that this kind of older gen has, that are you're finding it rework or start anew here in with a brand new league starting in 2025. I think that's really cool. I wonder if you'll see some Portuguese connections, and I have wondered, to be honest, especially with the salaries, if you would see some Portuguese players who either had great experiences playing with Chloe Lacasse or Olivia Smith, and wonder what Canada will be like, and be more curious, because that pay packet will be attractive for a lot of players who play overseas in countries that we feel have more established leagues, but where the pay is nowhere near that.
The pay is certainly attractive to a lot of these players, but there are still a lot of questions around this. What travel's going to look like, in what scenarios, you're playing in and training in, because that information 99 days, 98 days out now is still very gray. And I know some players that, haven't seen stadiums. We still don't know where all the stadiums. There's, strong rumors that Vancouver will be at Swangard, but there's a lot to do in the next 99 days, including, sign over half the league. There's still not in the grand scheme of things, Alex.
Yeah, but I think that's expected. That's a new league. There's going to be people who take that risk and join, what they see, and some will maybe wait and have a look later. I think something to watch is the international market. And I'm fascinated because, Brendan, you mentioned Portugal. For example, them, of course, they're in their season. I do wonder if it comes to April, May, their season comes to an end, and in the summer they see the NSL. Maybe the NSL has a hot few first months. Maybe there's some teams with some international spots, maybe even that coveted DP spot that we've heard about but not know much about. And they come calling like, hey, we heard about you. Here's a good, very competitive offer. We want to get you away from a Sporting, or maybe some of those middle table Portugal clubs, right? Where, like there's some Canadians playing at like a CanMNT. Maybe there's some superstar CanMNT there that can get poached, and all of a sudden that could really boast the league. I think that's something to watch, because it is worth noting that with the timeline, it's tough for some of these internationals, because if you're joining this league, you're leaving your club, you're taking a risk. Whereas maybe if you wait for the summer, that could open the door for some very intriguing transfers, especially for some of these bigger markets.
I also think it's all about timing too, right? And you think about the CPL and some of the players that internationally have come into the CPL. Benny Badabanga, great example. I don't think that's a player that's coming year one, right? You could have put out today's pay packet for him. I don't think you're getting that player year one. You needed to see some pedigree. He needed to see to have something to gauge, right? He needed to have a sample size, and that'll be the case with the NSL. I do think that the pay will make that required sample size shorter. And you can get someone like Jessica Silva, who just left Portugal to join Gotham at age 30. In a similar situation in 3 years from now, 2027, 27, 28, I think that type of player will be looking at Canada almost not equal to NWSL, but in the same ilk, like as a comparable.
That'll certainly be interesting. And one name from Portugal, at least, to keep an eye on, I think, would be Megan Sauvé, who was a standout with the University of Montreal and has since gone up, potentially come home. Lots of moves in MLS as well. Montreal's been busy signing Giacomo Vrioni and Jalen Neal. DP, Giacomo Vrioni, an absolute steal for $50,000 in GAM. And Brendan, I know that you were pretty excited about this signing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's great that they're building a squad when it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, off the pitch with Montreal and Vancouver right now. There's louder and louder rumblings, it seems, that management is looking at some American partners, whether that means an American relocation in the near future. Look, that's where our fearful minds immediately go. But they're investing in the club on the pitch in what seem like creative and competitive ways. And to get a guy like that who can put the ball in the back of the net, and did so pretty well for the Revolution, who weren't a great team. Montreal need to replace Joseph Martinez. Montreal need to replace Romel Kyoto from 3 years ago. And this could be, with both Neil and him, and having lost Cuccaro, who never reached the level that they'd hoped. I think they're in a better position to be better under Laurent Courtois in his second season and in his first, Alex.
Yeah, for sure. And what I just want to say about this is shout out to Montreal and their way they've navigated the MLS trade market. You kind of, you can kind of clown on MLS for the trade market, and I'm very curious to see the future of it, especially that they've floated around the idea of just being normal and being able to sell players within your league for 5 to 10 million, 20 million, not have jam attached to it, not have it where you sell a guy for 5 mil and you only get 1 million of it to actually use on GAM and all these weird rules. Yeah. But hey, the trade market, there's, like any MLS mechanism, there's value to be had. And you just look at the list that Montreal's found over the years. Like, I'd run out of fingers, right? Like Alistair Johnston, Kamal Miller, George Campbell, Caden Clark now, Jaquil Marshall-Rudy. Like, they found a lot of value on the market. And now to get Jalen Neal, I really like that move for Montreal. I liked him a lot watching him at LA Galaxy, being here on the West Coast and getting to see him live and on telly. I think that's a good center back signing, like the upside there. In terms of Veroni, that's something where, you do wonder, will he be worth the DP tag? But that for a Montreal team that doesn't really, they've been comfortable to live without DPs, for them to get a DP salaried player for just 50,000, that's something where there's a lot of upside to that move. And man, it just makes you wonder, what could they do if they were a bit more active on actually splashing the cash on internationals? Because they've done such a good job of unearthing talent within the domestic borders, so to speak.
And still pretty quiet on the Whitecaps and TFC coaching fronts. Jim Curtin still without a job. I heard some potential links that he was close to the Whitecaps job, but also reports out there that David Wagner could potentially be close to the Whitecaps job, even though there are also strong reports that he's close to the Plymouth Argyle job over in England. So some movement when it comes to the Whitecaps. Curtin is still unemployed. TFC and the Caps look like two candidates in MLS. Assuming it hasn't happened by the time of this show, is it certain that one of them will get it done? I wouldn't say it's certain, because there's going to be other opportunities for Curtin. He's said that he's interested in potential assistant jobs. I wouldn't imagine those are in MLS. And taking a step to Canada would be a big step considering the situation.
Yeah, I think the concern with Vancouver, especially in the uncertainty of what the future might hold with the team and new ownership, that's hard on a guy who came from a really, I shouldn't say comfortable situation. He's obviously had to work to build that, but a stable system. And to Alex's point from the last couple of weeks, this new manager is inheriting a team that's in win mode now, but not necessarily in build mode. And Jim Curtin seems like a builder. He just maybe this is different, that now he'd be happy to jump around and live in new cities, but he seems like a person that is comfortable to stay in one place for a while. And Vancouver probably isn't that place. I feel like David Wagner would be a bit of a coup. We joke that there would be some German names in the mix, and I would be astonished if there wasn't at least one German in his Axel Schuster's top three in the podium that he spoke about of candidates to AFTN. So we'll see what happens with Wagner and Curtin. I think I've said with you guys, I don't see Curtin taking either job. And to be honest, if he sits and waits, there will be a mid-season opening somewhere, and maybe it's a better situation for him. Maybe it's someone who made a move and got it wrong. Maybe it's New York, or maybe it's St. Louis. Those are situations I can see him waiting for, as opposed to feeling like he has to take one of these now.
Yeah, it definitely feels like if he wants to rebuild, maybe Toronto would be more the attractive option. But the question is, how much is there actually going to be a rebuild? There are reports like if an Insigne goes, okay, and then you can really start the rebuild. If he stays, it's hard to imagine a world where you're paying, guys 20 plus mil and you're rebuilding. That's kind of something that investment warrants a win now. But then, you go to Vancouver. Jim Curtin's a funny one with Vancouver because he actually fits the team quite well when you look at the parallels. Mm-hmm. Like you can see Ryan Gauld slotting into the 10 of that 4-3-1-2. You can see Sam Adekugbe playing that Kai Wagner role. You can see the midfielders they have fitting in as that base of three that the Union did so well to use over the years. There's a lot of fits there, but I guess, the question is how much is Jim Curtin, is he willing to take more of what could be a short-term job? Maybe that helps raise his stock, show, hey, look, I can do it with another MLS team. Because there are some doubts of, he was a one club man for so long with the Union. What happens when you take him outside that system? But yeah, it's interesting to see that some of these names linked with the Whitecaps. JJ Adams threw something interesting out there that I'd heard, and other names had heard that they were very close to signing a German coach that ended up signing with Union Berlin, Stefan Baumgart, which would have been a very good, signing to be linked with that caliber of coach, someone who ultimately signed for a Bundesliga club. Unfortunately for the Whitecaps, when the Bundesliga comes calling, you're not winning that battle very often. So I am curious to see if maybe there's some other names that we're not even hearing in that mix of that ilk, because they've definitely done well to make some big swings in that regard.
Just on the Insigne point, and sorry, Ben, if you had this planned down the road, but in departing from this era in Toronto with Lorenzo Insigne and financing this divorce, that doesn't mean that MLSE will be willing to spend a fraction of that money again. And I do think that they're going to really look at ways to not put themselves in that same position. And whether that means you're just taking a flyer on a $1.5 million young DP, some South American, as other MLS teams have had success in. I'm very curious to see how Toronto FC goes about said divorce with Insigne, and then what they look to do this season, because I don't think they have a clue what they want to do. And I don't know how close they are to finding a coach. So I think that a lot of Toronto FC fans will be happy if this Insigne chapter comes to an end, but that doesn't mean there'll be more clarity on what the next chapter holds.
Well, speaking of rumors, there's a lot of Canadian rumors out there, and we'll touch on some of them in Canadians Abroad, along with some of the roundup of top and pertinent performances. For a full roundup, of course, you cannot ignore the work of those over at Canucks Abroad. They do an excellent job. If you want to keep up with, the guys in the Estonian third tier, they got you covered. We'll keep it a little higher up in the weeds today. And to start, we'll go right for the big guns. Jonathan David, naturally, he can technically as of January 1st, sign a pre-contract agreement with anyone outside of France. And there's been a couple of Premier League teams linked to him as per Sky Sports. Meanwhile, Alphonso Davies is as close as ever to signing an extension with Bayern Munich, which is a bit of a turn of events, but makes sense. He's been having a good season. Sounds like Nick Jose is in Munich to really have a go at those discussions. I know Bayern's been very close on Jamal Musiala, so they've been really trying to lock down some of their young core, Brendan. So for Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David, who would have thought a year ago that Davies would not be going to Real Madrid, and looks like Jonathan David certain to be on the move.
Yeah, I mean, with David, you never know. I mean, we spoke about this long list of suitors that never put real solid offers on the table for him. So I hope that's a different scenario, and he has the pick of his own choice, Jonathan David. As for Alphonso Davies, to see him stay at Bayern Munich, I think it's good for the player, to be honest. For Canadian soccer and for us in the business, I want to see Alphonso Davies in the Premier League. I want to see both of them in the Premier League. Manchester United might be a disaster on the pitch for Alphonso Davies, but I think overall for Canada soccer, the product, and Alphonso Davies, the face of the sport, I would have really loved to have seen him move to United or to Real Madrid. But from a playing perspective, staying in Bayern, I think is smart with what they seem to be building under Vincent Kompany, and this, reset this next generation, which Jamal Musiala will certainly be a centerpiece of. Davies has a very good thing going, which is why it always seems surprising he was having his head turned. But if he stays there, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world.
I think your head's always going to turn when it comes to some of those big clubs if they're potentially calling, and it seemed like he had his heart set on Real Madrid for a little while as well. I think that would have been the move to go for. From the minute that we started talking about the Manchester United links, that I think that was not the right move for Alphonso Davies. And I think with the way that United has gone, it's good that he didn't go and isn't going as of now to United. But a move to one of the big clubs could be cool, certainly for Canadian soccer, cool for him to play in a new league. But I think that Bayern is one of those big clubs, maybe, a step down from the likes of Real Madrid, but it's still a fantastic spot for him to be. And I think not shaking him up as a living situation is also good as well. They can continue to focus on the football and growing as a player under Kompany's system. Yeah,
what do you mean? I saw the way Diogo Dalot was getting forward against Liverpool on Sunday. I think Alphonso Davies would have been doing some excellent things in the final third. But hey, that's another situation. I mean, another one, Andy Gold 61 throwing at us here. Do you think Jonathan David or Alphonso Davies can end up at Arsenal? I don't think Davies is going to go to Arsenal because they have like 17 left backs. Ricardo Calafiori. I mean, Kieran Tierney is going to go to Celtic. They got Jacob Kivior. Too many guys there already. But Jonathan David, you do always wonder if Arsenal could use him. They've struggled to find their striker. Is it Kai Havertz? Gabriel Jesus found some form at the end of December, but he's quieted down. I've always said I could see David fitting in at Arsenal, but we'll see about that, because I think there'll definitely be a few Premier League teams looking at him. Speaking of other names, Dieu merci Michel. What a name, first off. Just, thank God, Michel, if you're for those who speak French. And I'm sure the way he's been scoring, some Canadian fans will be thanking, higher powers that they have another dual national to speak of, because the 20-year-old forward has recently made his Liga Portugal debut for Vitória de Guimarães, and he recently scored his first pro goal in a thrilling 4-4 draw with Sporting. So pretty good for him to be getting on the board against one of the biggest clubs in Portugal. All of a sudden, another Canadian forward dual national we're speaking of. Just to note, he actually was called in as a training player to a Canadian camp a couple of years ago. So he's not someone that this group won't be aware of. So Brendan, is this the next dual national we should be keeping an eye on?
It could be. It's exciting. I just like that we get to keep our eyes on the Portuguese league and encourage people to watch more of what's happening in Portugal. That's exciting, man. And, we see this all the time with Canadian players who are a little off the radar or under the radar. You perform well, in good leagues against the big teams in those leagues, and immediately your stock rises. So all the best to him. I hope he has a much better season and it continues, much like Justin Smith seems to be doing in Spain. Yeah,
and well, as Joel Heidebrecht throws at us, how would you rate trying to cap tie Dieu merci Michel? Would you rate it a low, medium, or high? Ben, I think this is an interesting one because he's eligible for Angola. So a bit of a different country than we're used to seeing in terms of dual nationality.
I think when you look at the competition aspect of whether it's Canada or Angola, it's more important that you captain him versus, we talked about Justin Smith last week, how, there's not really a possibility that he's getting called up by France. So you can probably wait that one out. It's worth calling in Diomercy Michel just to tie him to Canada, even if you provisionally tie him to Canada through a friendly match or something like that, then at least there's some roots there. He knows that you're calling. You're not necessarily making him frustrated either. So I do think that it's worth giving him a call, even if it's something that you don't want to look at as, a regular call up for another 2, 3, heck, even 5 years.
100%. I think the Angola links, it's worth watching. And if you haven't read about Diomercy Michel, fantastic story. He moved to Alberta super young after being born in Montreal. His family dealt with homelessness while they were in Alberta. So for him to go make it as a professional in Liga Portugal, fantastic story. And I think that's someone who's got a strong connection to Canada when you read that story and you want to keep it, although you imagine Angola will come calling. Otherwise, Jamie Knight-Labelle, center back, he's also turned into a goal scorer for Crew Alexandra. He scored twice in a 3-game span over the last few weeks. So he was joking that he wanted one to fall, and now he's gotten a few starting to fall. And I'm sure the way he's been looking offensive, we'll see a few more. Otherwise, in terms of transfer news, Charles Andreas Brim has swapped Eredivisie clubs, going from Sparta Rotterdam to Almere City. You kind of wondered maybe might he try MLS at his age, but he ends up sticking in the Netherlands, and good for him, I think, with the forward depth to make a move like that, because hey, we keep throwing out names like Diomercy Michel, Promise David. You can't forget Charles Andreas Brim if he catches some form in that regard. And just another forward, I'll package them both for you, Brendan. Daniel Jebison, forget about him. He had a loan to forget at Watford. It was pretty awful, to be honest. The Watford fans not pleased with him, but he's just been given a lifeline at Bournemouth. They lost Evan Nilsson for 8 to 12 weeks with a foot injury, and now Enes Unal, the replacement, blew out his knee in training and is out for the year. So they have now no first team strikers. So they recalled Daniel Jebison. So he now all of a sudden has a chance to get regular minutes in the Premier League. Between Brim, Jebison, I mean, the strikers just seem to be coming out of everywhere for this Canadian team in terms of guys to watch, eh?
Yeah, well, hopefully he can, show his level and perform at a level that justifiably talks about him being called into the Canadian team. I feel like we don't have enough of a sample size now since the heart condition to know what Daniel Jebison is, and I think you got to assume that time away mentally has wreaked havoc on a player that seemed to be on a pretty good trajectory. So the door's wide open here in Bournemouth. It's obviously tough in a team like that, and it's tough in the Premier League. But we know that he's got a good skill set, so I'm hoping that we'll see it. And will be paying much more attention to Cherry's matches than I would have previously.
And otherwise, in terms of some CPL transfer news, Matteo Di Brienne has made his long-awaited jump to Europe. It's been a while since we heard those rumors, going to Allsvenskan Club Gais, or GAIS. I'm not sure how to pronounce it because it's like an abbreviation.
If you don't know, we don't know, Alex.
Pretty cool name, but Ben, this one for you from Marsh Plus Blue 24. Matteo Di Brienne to Sweden's pretty big deal, no? Like, feels like there should be more chatter because the Allsvenskan, good level. We've seen Derek Cornelius make a name for himself, then going to France, and now Matteo Di Brienne looking to follow in his footsteps.
Yeah, for a player to make a move like that is what this league is for. And we've heard those rumors of Matteo Di Brienne to move to Europe over the last several years. And he's still young. He's still got that potential. We've seen him, develop into new positions in the CPL than he was potentially, playing in U Sports in his first couple of years in the CPL, where things didn't necessarily go to plan for him either. But he's been exceptional in the CPL. To take that next step up to the Allsvenskan is the progression that you want to see. Does it put him in the CanMNT picture yet? Probably not. But it's that step that you want to see for a player that is still young and can grow in his game, because, he's still only, I think, like 23, even 22.
And after Alphonso Davies and Sam Adekugbe, the depth chart left back is wide open. So we'll see how he progresses. I'd like to see more moves like that with the calendar lining up, Allsvenskan on a winter calendar. It's a good gateway to Europe where you're not getting dropped into a league that might be too tough. I mean, we saw Marco Bustos had some good glimpses. Hopefully Matteo Di Brienne can find some success and really open the door. But speaking of opening the door, one thing we love here over at Northern Futbol is when Canadians play together. Why? So it's easier to watch them. And now we got 2 Canadians to watch at AS Roma, as Mia Panty, League One BC alum and a Canadian under 20 standout. Mia Panty is now joined AS Roma, and they've already won a trophy together. I mean, Pante didn't feature in the squad, but Evelyn Vian returned from injury, which is also a bit of good news as Roma beat Fiorentina in the Supercoppa Italia final. So a new Canadian to watch at Roma, already winning trophies. What's more to like about that? Keep an eye on their games. But on that note, that's all we had for Canadians abroad today. And that's all we had for Northern Futbol. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Make sure to check us out on X or Blue Sky, depending on where you get your social. We're trying to be active on both. And you can also find us on Instagram, but otherwise make sure to leave a review, rate, like, and we'll catch you again soon for episode 210.